welcome everyone. We are so glad to have you join us here for this Pratikramaṇa for the climate, this guided meditation with Dr. Jhankhana Jina Shah. Jina is a lifelong Jain and a trained climate realities leader. Dr. Shah has been vegan for 35 years and is also a past chair of the Eco-Vegan Committee of Jaina, the Federation of Jain Associations of North America. Jina has written about the compassion and health aspects of veganism from a Jain perspective at veganjains.com. Professionally, she is dual board certified in family medicine and general preventative medicine, and she has worked in clinical medicine, public health, pharmaceutical safety, and bioethics. We are really honored to have Jina with us today to do this Pratikramaṇa for the climate, and we will at the end have time for questions and answers. So please feel free during the event or when the time comes to the end to type any of your questions that you may have for Jina into the chat or into the Q&A box, to be more specific, at the bottom of Zoom. So without further delay, I will welcome our speaker and guide for this Pratikramaṇa today, Dr. Jhankhana Jina Shah. Thank you, Jina.
Thank you so much, Professor Miller, and Diana and Letty from Arihanta Institute as well. I appreciate your support in the platform and all the facilitation of this Pratikramaṇa. And I want to welcome all the attendees. I see some friends and family. I see people that are lifelong Jains that are interested in the climate, that are friends from different parts of my and Christian's life. And I know that we're all coming with our own reasons for being here and our own background. So what we'll try to do in this Pratikramaṇa for the climate is provide something that everyone can relate to. It might be a little foreign to some of you. It might be a little less traditional than others of you are used to, but please bear with us. Please bear with me. And let's see as things go if you can find something of value. And as you go along, as Professor Miller said, you can put questions in the Q&A. This is a webinar format, so I can't actually see folks. And you'll be seeing my slides a lot of the time. But if something's going on that you need to ask a question or pause, put it in the Q&A. We'll try to save the discussion to the last half hour, and we'll have the presentation primarily for this first hour. If I can fit it all in, hopefully I can. And in the traditional Pratikramaṇa, which is a ritual that's done in a time of reflection around this time of year, according to the lunar calendar, people sit in one place and they're very disciplined about not moving. They don't eat. They primarily try to be in a kind of seated posture with a very traditional set of rituals. In this online version, if some of you want to have that sort of commitment to stay in one place and really, you know, ground yourself and stay in this practice in that way, you're welcome to do so. Since you're not on camera, you're also free if you need to stretch a little bit in between, to take a mindful walk or to move as you need to feel comfortable. So we won't be seeing you, but what I would request is that you give your attention to this from start to finish as much as you can, so that it all fits together in a coherent practice. And if you would like, especially towards the end, you may want to take some notes because there will be a section where you reflect on your actions and you decide if you want to take some commitments. And so if you want to take notes, then to come back to, if you're the kind of person who finds that useful, you could gather those materials now or later as we go. And so with that, we'll get started. And as our introduction, we're going to acknowledge our respect for and invoke the blessings of the Jain teachers and tradition. And we'll open with Namaskar Sutra or Namaka Mantra. Om Namo Arihantanam. Om Namo Siddhanam. Om Namo Ayaryanam. Om Namo Vajrayanam. Namo Loe Savasahunam. Eso Panchanamukaro Savapava Parasano Mangalanam cha Savesim Paramam Have Mangalam. The English translation of this most important sutra in Jainism is shown on the right here. And this comes from the transliteration, the transcription, and the translation and other sutras like it come from a book called To Light One Candle by Claire Rosenfeld and Pramodaben Chitrabhanu. And this sutra pays reverence, or it shows that literally we're bowing to the 5 types of respected beings, teachers, and practitioners in Jainism. Those enlightened beings that have taught us how to bring an end to inner afflictions or enemies like greed, anger, deceit, and selfishness, and have shared as teachers publicly their insights and pathways to freedom. Those are called Tirthankars or Arihantas. The Siddhas are perfected ones who have liberated themselves from cycle of rebirth and become one with the light. Acharyas are the masters whose character and living exemplify the teaching. The Upadhyayas are also teachers at different levels that stay in the heart of scriptural knowledge. And the sadhus are those that have renounced world household attachments, and they're saying worldwide, so across the world, that practice the universal teaching. So by opening to these examples of practitioners and teachers, these examples of universal consciousness, we allow our own tendencies to subside and our wholesome qualities to manifest. So what is Pratikramaṇa? It's a practice of introspection, which literally means coming together from all directions. And it's important in Varyushan, in one of our sects, and Daslakshan, the other sect of Jainism, as well as other subsects. And we're in the beginning of Daslakshan at this point. There's an element of repentance, which can bring up negative emotions and feelings of cognitive dissonance. This requires us to practice in a state of equanimity. But it's not just negative. There's an affirming alignment with our highest values, where we give ourselves space to forgive others and forgive ourselves. There's an opportunity here for healing and multiplication of our individual and collective goodness. So as we care for our spirits, we care for all beings. We'll open with a story. And the story is primarily of this king elephant Meruprabha, but it starts when he's a human being. Jainism involves reincarnation, so bear with us if this is new to you. The prince Meghakumar had decided to become a monk in the time of Lord Mahavir. This is the 24th of our teachers, or Tirthankars. As a junior monk, this prince had given up everything, and he was given a place to sleep near the entrance of the brothers' monastery. At night, other monks who had to go to toilet had to walk over him through the doorway. And there were no electric lights, and sometimes they couldn't see, and they trampled on his mattress or his bed covering. It wasn't a mattress actually back then. Sometimes they accidentally kicked him, and he couldn't sleep. He had grown up in luxury, and it was really hard for him to bear with this accidental kicking and getting dirt smeared on him, getting his bed sheet or whatever he was sleeping on dirty. And he was just fed up. So in the morning, he went to Lord Mahavir and he said, I can't do this. Like, I got to go home. But Lord Mahavir said, you don't remember, Meghakumar. You have been through so much more than this. Let me describe to you the discomforts that you faced during your previous life. And this is where the heart of the story starts. In his previous life, he was the king elephant Meruprabha. In a forest where there were many different animals, they were trying to take refuge as a fire raged all around them. Actually, before this fire started, this king elephant took care to try to clear the forest to prevent it, but it didn't work. So there's fire all around. The animals tried to move to the center. And in the middle of all this desperation and fear, the king elephant was standing in the center, and he's raised his leg because he had to scratch an itch on his legs. In the moment where he raised his leg, another rabbit was trying to figure out where to stand, and he found a space under the outraised foot of the elephant. And this rabbit just stayed there, and the elephant had so much compassion that he kept this foot raised for days, like 3 days and 3 nights. In the meantime, the fire subsided and the animals all scampered to safety, including the rabbit. But the elephant's leg had become so stiff that he was exhausted. He fell over and he died. Because of this compassion that he showed and his good actions, upon death, this elephant was born as the Prince Megakumar. So there's many lessons to be learned from this story. But two that I'd like us to think about are, like the elephant protecting the rabbit, are we willing to tolerate discomfort to save others? And what can we do to help prevent the fires? So this brings us to Jainism, environmentalism, and the climate crisis. Back in 1990, there was an Indian jurist, parliamentarian, scholar, writer, and diplomat who was the High Commissioner of India to the UK. He wrote the Jain Declaration on Nature, and he presented it to Prince Philip to mark the entry of the Jain faith to the World Wildlife Federation Network on Conservation and Religion. You can see his picture on the stamp here on the right. He said, Jainism is fundamentally a religion of ecology and has turned ecology into a religion. It has enabled Jains to create an environment-friendly value system and code of conduct. And he explored further some of the tenets of Jainism. Ahimsa, aparigraha, and asteya are three of the principles and ways that we take vows as lay people to practice Jainism. Ahimsa literally is nonviolence, and some have said it's the most beautiful word in any language. But it's more than not doing violence. It is more than an attitude. It is a whole way of life. One example in Jainism is that we are pretty much uncompromisingly vegetarian. Abstaining from animal products helps not only animals whose lives we spare, but all beings that depend on the well-being of the earth. And we'll talk about how vegetarianism and better veganism helps with climate change. There's also, and he didn't talk about this, but we'll extend it. Aparigraha is limiting one's consumption and material possessions, and aparigraha benefits the earth and all beings. Consuming less stuff benefits the climate. Asteya is refraining from stealing from our planet, other beings, and future generations. Some young people are particularly passionate about climate justice as their futures are affected. These three principles or ways of practice are interconnected. So let's take a look at the root of ahimsa, this most important principle in Jainism. It stems from our fundamental belief that all beings have a conscious desire to live, and they suffer when we deprive them of life. In displaying the sutras, I will sometimes read the Sanskrit or Prakrit original language in the Indian tradition that the sutras are from. Sometimes I'll just read the English, and sometimes I might read both. So whatever you prefer to read on the screen, you can feel free to read. And if you just want to listen, that's fine. These slides will also be made available later for future. So in this one, I'll just read the English. All living beings are souls. alive and conscious, just like me. As I like to be happy and do not like to be in pain, in the same way, all beings like to be happy and do not like to be in pain. By keeping this insight at the core of my being, I will not cause any harm, pain, or loss of life to any living being. Now, one thing to think about is in Jainism, there's no such thing as us putting another being out of its misery by killing that being, because fundamentally it's this desire to live that we have in common with others. So there's no such thing as mercy killing. The importance of ahimsa is further underscored by a few of these sutras. Ahimsa paramo dharmastata, ahimso paro damaha, ahimsa paramam danam, ahimsa paramo tapaha. And this other one, there's nothing so small and subtle as the atom, nor any element so vast as space. In the same way, there's no quality of soul more subtle than ahimsa, harmlessness, and no virtue of spirit greater than reverence for all life. And this brings us to a core sutra of Pratikramaṇa, Iriya Vahya. Some of you that are familiar with the ritual will know this well. I'll also, in this case, share the English, because some of us have heard it, but we don't exactly know what it means. Iriya Vahya, e varahana, e gamana gamane, parna kamane, biya kamane, hariya kamane, osa utinga panagadaga, matti makara santana sankamane, je me jiva, virahiya, ekindia beindia, teindia, charindia, panchindia, abhiyaya vattiya leshya, sanghaya, sangatiya, pariyaya viya, kilamaya, udiya viya, thana o thanam, sankamiya, jivya o vavarovi ayat tasamichami dukram. In the English translation, this enumerates the ways that we may have hurt living beings very concretely. So while walking, I may have hurt living beings. Coming and going, I may have crushed them like seeds and green grass and plants. I may have crushed beings in the dew and the anthills and moss, in water particles, earth, spider webs. I may have caused pain, and they go through very systematically the beings with one sense, with touch, like they call earth, water, fire, and air all living, and plant life. Beings with touch and taste, like worms and shells, these are two sense beings. Those with three, adding smell, such as ants. Those with four senses, adding taste, bees and other insects. And then all five senses, fish, birds, mammals, animals, and human beings of all kinds. And so we talk about those that may have been covered by dust, who may have been caused to collide with each other, may have been tormented, may have caused pain, who may have been frightened, who may have been separated from life and made lifeless. And the end is, may all of those beings that suffered because of them forgive me. May the ignorance in me that caused pain to others be brought to an end. And may all be forgiven and forgotten. Other aspects of Jain philosophy are exemplified by the traditional teaching, Parasparopagraho Jivana, meaning all life is bound together by mutual support and interdependence. Or as an alternate translation, souls render service to one another. All life is bound together. Lives are all dependent on air, food, and water. It is not only the human perspective that's important, but those of other beings. So we should be in harmony and not attempt to dominate nature. And specifically with climate, as we're going to go to that, it's linked to livability and disease risks, with indirect and direct effects, with fragile beings and poor communities most affected. They are worthy of our care. So we've talked about the traditional forms of violence that Jains traditionally avoid, and the things like eating meat and killing mosquitoes, and things that are hard to avoid, like what we name and request to be forgiven for, as in the sutra that we just read. But there's new forms of violence in modern times, especially because governments and business institutions collectively enable hundreds of millions of humans to cooperate with each other to commit unimaginable kinds and levels of violence. Because of the scale and complexity, individuals may not recognize or feel responsibility for the violence enabled by our actions. And we're disconnected. A person living by the principles of ahimsa would not want to directly participate in wiping out a forest, poisoning the environment, torturing dairy cows, putting plastic in the ocean. But we do participate in forms of indirect violence, as shown here. So there are new forms of violence in modern times. The top panel shows the confinement of animals, in this case, mother cows in factory farms. This confinement and other ways of mistreating and exploiting cows shortens their lives. They're forcibly impregnated, separated from their children. And then if they're males, they're killed. Hens are similarly exploited. Although Jainism traditionally prohibits eggs, the reasons are never clear. The modern conditions make it perfectly clear that they're exploited in similar ways as cows, with the baby male chicks being killed and the hens being tortured and exploited for their reproductive abilities. In addition to these, we see the fires that are very dramatically shown here as an example of climate change, and we'll talk much more about that in the rest of the Pratikramaṇa and explore what that means. The bottom right panel shows a turtle who actually mistakes a plastic bag for a jellyfish, and it kills the sea turtle. So in Jainism, we are responsible for unintentional as well as intentional violence, and we face the karmic consequences, not in a punitive way, but what we experience what we inflict. Is an example of the scale of the plastic problem. There's 8 million tons of plastic that takes its place in the ocean every year. This is a picture of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and there's 4 more. So after this Jain Declaration on Nature, and as a way to incorporate some of the indirect forms of violence that we've discussed and update the climate change aspects of our impacts on nature, we wrote the Jain Declaration on the Climate Crisis. We is Sudhanshu Jain and myself. Sudhanshu is now a city councilman in Santa Clara, California, who had also trained as a climate reality leader and dedicated his time to working on this for a long time, even prior to when I became aware. This Jain Declaration on the Climate Crisis was endorsed by the Executive Committee of JAINA, the Federation of Jain Associations of North America, in 2019. A lot of the basics of Jainism and the climate crisis can be found in that document. Unfortunately, since 2019, the situation has only worsened. So let's take a deep breath and let's consider, what is climate change and what are the causes? Many of this next section of slides come from the Climate Reality Project. They're very professionally done, and some are animated, so I hope you'll find them easy to follow and understand. Solar radiation in the form of light waves passes through the atmosphere, and most of the radiation is absorbed by the Earth and warms it. Some energy is radiated back into space by the Earth in the form of infrared waves. Some of the outgoing infrared radiation is trapped by the Earth's atmosphere and warms it. As the concentration of carbon dioxide increases, more of the outgoing infrared radiation is trapped. This is a really key concept in terms of what used to be called global warming and can be called climate change now. And why is the concentration increasing? Because of the burning of fossil fuels to build and run modern society that has increased the concentrations of CO2 in the atmosphere from about 280 parts per million in pre-industrial times to over 425 parts per million in 2025, which has reflected an acceleration. But it's not just carbon dioxide. There's also methane concentration, which has been increasing since pre-industrial times to the latest year shown here, which is 2023. Each molecule of methane has more than 82 times the heat trapping power of each molecule of carbon dioxide over a 20-day period. And what are the sources of methane? Human caused. So some of these estimates vary, but according to this global carbon project source, about a third is livestock. That's animal factory farming. A small proportion, some from rice, water intensity. another third from fossil fuel extraction and other activity, and then waste dumps, landfills, wastewater, and burning of biomass. This is a nice graphic showing the biggest sources of greenhouse gases, and you'll see kind of categories of where greenhouse gases come from. On the bottom left, industrial processes and industrial agriculture, such as factory farming. You'll also see fossil fuels, coal mining, coal plants, oil production. And then other agricultural practices like fertilization, crop burning, and forest burning, which in some cases is to clear land for animal agriculture. Transportation, like land transport, flying, air transport, landfills we mentioned earlier. And then paradoxically and sadly, with the climate warming and glaciers melting, the thawing permafrost also adds additional greenhouse gases. This slide shows how much of man-made global warming pollution is going into the atmosphere as if it were an open sewer, 175 million tons every day. And even some of these numbers are underestimates. So this slide's a little complicated. Let me walk you through it. In 2006, there was a report from the Food and Agriculture Organization called Livestock's Long Shadow. This report estimated the contribution of animal agriculture to be only 18%. But a few years later, the World Watch Institute report on greenhouse gas emissions from livestock showed that there are some undercounted, overlooked, and misallocated emissions, and that 18% may be an underestimate. And they kind of broke out all the different ways that we may be undercounting. Some of them are about excluding fishing and its role in feeding land animals, the energy required for cooling, cooking, disposing, processing, and packaging animal products versus plant products. And then I'll show you in the next few slides a few other examples of big categories. So in Brazil, in 2023, the estimate was that cattle ranching was responsible for 80% of current deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon, which is a huge loss globally. From dairy, and we emphasize this when we speak to Jain audiences because Jains are primarily vegetarian but not vegan, there is a huge impact. 278 million dairy cows are bred and exploited in the world. About 9 million of them are in the US. There's a lot of water used to produce a gallon of milk, 144 gallons of water to produce 1 gallon of milk. And more than 93% of that is used to grow feed. 100 pounds of feed eaten per day by US dairy cow. And then for the cropland, 9% of the available US cropland is used to feed crops for dairy cows, 34 million acres. So we can't go into depth on all of this, but this is to give you a sense of the causes and the extent of the problem. We'll talk more about the extent, but let's take a few breaths because there's a lot to take in, and it's quite a sad situation. Let's remember our deep intentions as we learn more about the extent of the problem and its effects. Between 1850 through 2020, the average temperature of the Earth's surface has been warming, but it's been accelerating. It's increased about 1 degree Celsius due to warming by greenhouse gases. This graph ends at 2020, but the last 10 years, including 2020 to 2025, have been the hottest ever. And there'll be a focus in the slides on India and the US just because of the cultural background from which Pratikramaṇa and the audience hails, but there'll be some examples from other areas as well. This quote is from an Indian leader who said, "You can only adapt so much. This heat wave is testing the limits of human survivability." And indeed, thousands of humans die every year due to hotter conditions and from extreme heat events. Between 2030 and 2050, climate change is expected to cause approximately 250,000 additional deaths per year. from heat stress, as well as diseases we'll talk about, malnutrition, malaria, and diarrhea. An area that's familiar to some of us in Ahmedabad, India, last year in the May-June heat wave, 77 people died, including 33 election poll workers. That same time in Delhi, the temperature reached almost 122 degrees Fahrenheit. In 2020 in Bihar, the monsoon was 50% higher than normal and caused 742 deaths. So how is rainfall connected? Well, extra carbon dioxide and heat is absorbed into the oceans, creating stress and dangerous living conditions. There's sea levels rising due to melting glaciers and hotter ocean temperatures. Low-lying areas are flooding. Since 1995, more than 90% of the excess heat retained by Earth has been absorbed into the oceans. Monsoons get stronger. Nearby in Bangladesh, there was a cyclone called Amphan. It was actually much worse than others. It was a super cyclonic storm, and it devastated the area. So warmer ocean temperatures can result in more intense storms and higher wind speeds. Warmer oceans and warmer air results in more water evaporating, and so extra water vapor leads to heavier downpours and subsequent flooding. The people that are affected here are like others in the world, that the poorest of the poor, and mass displacement and migration. Like in this case, the Bangladeshi farmers went to Dhaka and then to Indian cities. Elsewhere, it has also happened and caused a lot of political upheaval and can challenge societies worldwide. Closer to home for some of us in the US, Hurricane Helene hit in September of 2024 in the southeastern states. So warmer ocean temperatures added extra energy to hurricanes, making them ever more destructive, with more than 10 inches of rain in the path through the southeast. And this resulted in, even in the US, 448 people dying across 6 US states. Some of us may be less familiar with what happened in Derna, Libya in 2023, where thousands of people died because of heavy rainfall causing dams to collapse, flooding the city. And this was a deadly storm and the costliest weather disaster on record in Africa. So the dam collapse is only an example of the types of infrastructure at risk from extreme weather. Here you can see many other types of infrastructure at risk. And if you have access to the climate reality training program, you'll see many slides of other infrastructure being affected. You can just imagine the disruption caused by transportation systems like trains and airport runways being affected, as well as communication and power, storms and dams, and unfortunately, people's food systems, agriculture. Some of us are very familiar with Chicago, Illinois. Well, in July 2021, the heavy rain and flooding overwhelmed the sewer system, and so geysers of raw sewage was sent shooting into the air. You can see in the middle of this photo. Since the increased heat of the Earth's surface increased the evaporation of water from oceans, but also of soil, there has been an increase of extreme rainfall as well as droughts. So you can see in this slide the change from 2002 to 2022, that the extremes are getting bigger, both on the wet and the dry end. And the results of this are, like in Bengaluru, used to be called Bangalore, India, last year, the city water wells, half of them had run dry. And with the density of the population, more than 4 million people rely on this water. Many have to purchase expensive water trucked in from other areas. And this is also seen in Chihuahua, Mexico, where a municipality president underscores how bad the situation is. The reservoirs without water, and he said that we see total devastation. It is not just humans that are affected. This cow exemplifies the vulnerability of animals as well. This is particularly poignant to me because we probably raised this cow to exploit, and now that cow is suffering along with the rest of the human beings. So this is not it, right? It's not only hurricanes, monsoons, floods, but as some of us know, unfortunately, all too well, forests are getting drier and wildfires are becoming increasingly more prevalent and destructive. The frequency of extreme wildfire events around the world more than doubled from 2003 to 2023 and continues to get worse after that. As of 2023, you can see in the flames the larger fires around the US and Canada, larger than 1,000 acres, and then the other fires as well. And the extent has been growing. And unfortunately, Los Angeles is a very sad recent example. Entire neighborhoods were burned through, and these fires destroyed more than 16,000 structures and killed at least 29 people. So my husband and I used to live in California and were affected by fire and smoke in the Bay Area at times. We moved to New Jersey, and unfortunately, there was also wildfire smoke from the Canadian fires over New York and New Jersey, as in 2023, and it's occurred in subsequent years as well. And it's also causing smoke inhalation and hospitalizations from air pollution, affecting the most vulnerable, including this child. And it can also affect cognitive development in children and the elderly, and can affect function of elderly people in later in life. So there's many global systems vulnerable to the climate crisis, and disruptions may lead to political or social instability. We've talked about food and water supply, and there's also global health, which is a topic that I've spent some time in my field working on. There's a lot of things that impact health, what we call social and environmental determinants of health. Climate change affects them because it affects air, water, food, and shelter. You can see here extreme weather events affect all of these things that affect each other. Air pollution, increasing allergic and asthma symptoms, decreased food security, and mental distress or health consequences caused or exacerbated, made worse by climate change. And there's also changes in the distribution of mosquitoes and other pathogens that carry diseases like malaria, West Nile, dengue, and Zika virus. Cholera is a preventable disease, but these cases and deaths soared, driven by disasters in climate and conflicts. And the WHO estimates nearly 100,000 people may have died from the disease in 2023. And the New York Times reported in 2024, fatalities continue to spike, outpacing the rises in cases. So this is very sad. In Brazil, waterborne illnesses like the disease called leptospirosis was a major public health concern after flood events last year. And even in the US, this is showing some flooding in Florida. More than 2/3 of waterborne disease outbreaks have been preceded by extreme precipitation events. This is all the impacts, really focusing on the impacts on humans, but our concern is for all of us. We're all connected, all living beings. And higher temperatures have also affected plants and animals. Higher temperatures have wreaked havoc on their ability to adapt. Tens of thousands of plant and animal species are going extinct. It's not just species, it's individuals that matter too. We're in the midst of the 6th great extinction, characterized by the loss of so many species each year. The last mass extinction wiped out the dinosaurs, and it's estimated that half of all plants, animals, and birds on the planet will die off before 2100. We have displaced them, we've poisoned their environments. It's a really horrible situation. So remember the elephant Meruprabha? Sadly, His modern cousins in the country of Botswana have been poisoned. In 2020, this picture shows that more than 350 elephants in the Delta in Africa's Okavango area were poisoned by the higher water temperatures promoting the overgrowth of toxic algae. What can we do? So again, I'm going to just say, take a breath. Remember your highest intentions. Even if we feel this is overwhelming and we feel powerless, we do have some guidance. We do have some inspiration on what we can do. We have a beautiful sutra that encourages us to couple awareness with our action. How shall I walk? In what manner shall I stand? How ought I sit? In what ways shall I sleep? In what attitude shall I speak and eat so that I stop creating cycles of karmic bondage for myself? When you walk, walk with awareness. When you stand, be mindful you are standing. When you sit, know what you are doing. When you sleep, remain aware. When you speak and eat, do not commit any harm to any living being. In this way, you will stop inviting painful consequences and will no longer create cycles of karmic bondage for yourself. Let's consider further how to apply and extend our teachings in a way that honors our deepest aspirations. Traditionally, in Pratikramaṇa, we reflect on ways we may have done harm in our lack of awareness. This is called atichars. And we may make some commitments or vows, vrats, to learn and do better. For lay people, these take the form of anuvrats, the 5 vows for lay people. In Pratikramaṇa, we also discuss some supporting merit and learning vows. We hold the simplicity of our monks and nuns. In one tradition, we call them sadhvis and sadhus, as our model to move towards the simplicity of their lifestyles and choose least harm. On the right is a picture of a Svetambar sadhvi, a female who has renounced the household life, carrying only a container, a stick, wearing only a single type of white cotton clothing, and having no home, no permanent home. So please take a moment to, if you wanted to reflect and write anything, to get your writing implements. And we'll now move into the first type of reflection and commitment for you to consider on the individual level. So when we talk about this, consider what resonates for you. If you've done something towards this action, and if not, if you want to reflect on what may have kept you from it and what you can commit to in the future. I've listed here how abstaining from animal products supports a learning and a merit vow. And the question to consider reflecting on is my addiction to certain tastes numbing me to the effects of the food that I eat on me and on the living beings that I consume? A little more dramatically, can I choose to eliminate the products that come from suffering, rape, and death for cows, suffering as well for chickens and other animals who love their lives as much as I love mine? If you want to let go of any attachment or habit, you could note that traditionally we might say this saying called appanambosidami, meaning I give this up. And why is this so important from a climate perspective? Of course, we know from a ahimsa perspective that these things are important. Well, there's this book called Project Drawdown, a 2017 book by climate scientist Paul Hawkins, which lists solutions to the climate crisis. And number 3 and number 4 is reduced food waste and a plant-rich diet. This is shown in terms of reduction in carbon dioxide equivalents, and there's no net cost and there's no net savings enumerated here, but I'm sure there's other ways to do this accounting. And this depiction of sample diet footprints shows that a vegan diet has the lowest tons of carbon dioxide equivalents per capita. I didn't decide to include it here, but cheese is one of the highest carbon embodying foods that one can choose apart from meat. So going further beyond food, please consider reflecting on whether you've done the following or what you can commit to. So buying and owning fewer material goods and minimizing waste is supportive of a vow of limited use of consumable and non-consumable items. You might consider asking yourself, am I hoarding items that others need? Does my material consumption support or distract from my wellness, generosity, and spiritual development? And people sometimes take some steps in this direction. They might say, I'm only going to buy new clothes if I give away an equal amount of clothes I already have and don't wear. Or they might say, I'm not going to buy anything new. Or they might say, I'm going to give away X number of items. Or they may make a bigger step, like for the next 5 years, I'm going to reduce what I own by X percentage. There's lots of different ways people can work on this one. And then the graphic here, there's the 3 R's that you often see in like conventional environmental circles about reduce, reuse, and recycle. But there's a 4th one that I think goes very well with our Jain sensibility. It's not just reduce, reuse, recycle, but also refuse. Just don't take something that you don't need, whether it's don't buy it, or even if somebody offers you something like the ubiquitous plastic water bottles that they have even at Jain meetings. You don't have to take it. You can decide to refill your own reusable bottle and thereby don't participate in that. Beyond stuff and food, here are some other things you can consider. Can I minimize my residential, transportation, and travel footprint? And this would support other learning and merit vows as shown here. So things to consider: is my home as space and energy efficient as I can make it? A bigger home means higher energy costs, higher not just costs in terms of money, but costs for the environment. Do we have enough people that actually need that space? Like maybe you don't need as big of a place as you have. Of course, we don't make changes instantly on something as big as a home, but it's something to consider. Also, we talked about travel being a cause of the increased global warming. Does the purpose of my travel outweigh the carbon emissions of my chosen mode? Do I have to fly? Is there a way to do this and actually have a lesser emission? Do I really need to go this time? Can I have a longer trip instead of multiple trips? And some climate scientists have taken the steps of saying, I'm not going to fly anymore, which is quite inspiring. We can also think about our occupation. Is my chosen work supportive of my and the collective well-being? Is my work supporting the environment or harming it? And then if we have the good fortune to have spare time and money, can I use my spare time and money to help an organization focus on animal protection and environmental justice? And this supports another vow, the vow of charity. Again, if you want to take notes, you're welcome to. If you want to make a point of saying, I'm not going to do something anymore, you can note that down. These are some of the actions on the individual level, and there's many more, but let's move to the community level. And some of these have an emphasis on the Jain community, but if you're not Jain and you have another community, you can consider what's relevant for you. So have I encouraged my community to do the following? Can we educate ourselves and our children about the climate crisis in our temples, community groups, schools, and workplaces? How can we how can we encourage, the overall education of girls globally? Women's education reinforces our spiritual worth and enables families to make wise choices regarding family size. And can we green our temple infrastructure, like where it's located? Can we make it closer to public transportation? Can we facilitate carpools? Can we use energy that's actually better for the environment, for heating, cooling, and cooking? Can we avoid so much disposable products and find ways to make it more sustainable? Traditionally, Jains didn't use paper and plastic products. We used stainless steel that we washed. Things have changed, though, and not in a good way. Why are these important? Well, going back to the same project drawdown list, educating girls and family planning is number 6 and number 7, which is pretty high up there, not something you might think about. And in terms of examples of greening temple infrastructure, where my husband and I spent many years in Northern California, the Jain Center there implemented a solar array on their parking structure. And this helped in terms of their carbon footprint, I think also reduced some costs. In a sister tradition, the Brahma Kumaris in India put in a solar thermal power plant in Mount Abu. And their rationale was the current environment crisis is a clear call to transform our awareness and lifestyle. I mentioned earlier about food and water waste. So have I encouraged my community to serve only vegan food, use only vegan items and rituals, such as artis and pujas, like coconut or almond oil in place of ghee, and using soy, almond, or any plant milk in place of cow's milk where it's used? Can we eliminate the use of polystyrene and single-use plastics? Can we use reusable plates and cutlery where possible? And otherwise, especially in places that have compost pickup, use compostable or biodegradable products only to minimize waste in our landfills. So on the picture here, an Indian inventor, Narayan Pisapati, invented cutlery made from jowar, rice, and wheat flours. You could eat the cutlery after you ate the food that you scooped up with it. This is a landfill in Milpitas, and you can see all the birds that are here, probably not doing very well, and how much land is occupied by this plastic waste and other products that also contribute to methane. There are other ways we could clean up after ourselves. What's shown here is from a sister tradition in Zen Buddhism, where I've gone on retreat. And here we have trays of water with initially more soapy water and then rinse water as you go through. People just go through with their own plates and their own cutlery. At the end, there's trays that get put into a sanitizer. So health is not compromised, but there's so much less waste here. And it requires the community to actually participate, and it requires a different way of setup. But some of our temples have this space. If we wanted to do it, we could find a way. There's also places in India, NGOs that have sinks, really scaled for community use, so that there's a way to clean up if we needed to. But it requires some creativity. Industrial strength dishwashers, another possibility. So beyond the individual and community level, as a global citizen, have I done the following, and can I commit to do so? Similarly, if you want to take some notes, you're invited to do so here. How can I support policy and institutions to consider ahimsa over short-term profit? Can I find ways to invest in companies that benefit the climate, poor people, and other vulnerable beings? Can I support government incentives for beneficial actions and disincentives for harmful ones by corporate interests? So this is kind of general ideas, but we'll go into some specifics in the next few slides. So for example, can I support elimination of subsidies and initiation of carbon taxes and bans at levels of government that are pertinent for you locally, regionally, nationally, to discourage animal product production, fossil fuels, plastics, and chemical pesticides? Can I support global incentives to encourage reforestation, greener energy technologies, and regenerative agriculture? Can I help promote healthy plant-based diets that will sustain all life? Can I support One Health? This can be a very technical concept, but the way that I see it is it's well-being for all of us who are interconnected living beings. This is a lot. So reflect a bit and see if there's anything that resonates for you. And it may not be right now, but I hope you can stay open and think about it as you continue. What would happen if fossil fuel subsidies were removed? Well, there's monetary impacts, which is equal to the amount needed for the global energy transition, which would be amazing. Very importantly for me, and I think most of us, 1.6 million human lives would be saved around the world, probably a lot more animal and plant lives. Emissions would fall 34% below 2019 levels by 2030. Incomes would be redistributed. So this shows the importance of green energy like wind and solar. In India, solar was a big part of new energy, electricity capacity. 82% of new capacity was from solar and wind. Unfortunately, the tariffs are putting a damper on India's nascent solar industry. In the US, solar is also, along with battery storage, an even bigger component, 97% solar, wind, and battery. And again, actually here, this is a kind of ironic and interesting example where you have solar panels on top of a coal mining museum, which is saving $8,000 to $10,000 a year in energy costs for this museum. But the offshore wind projects have recently been canceled. Federal money for offshore wind projects have been canceled, and solar has been disincentivized as well. So what can we do? Join those who are using their voices, their votes, their choices to advocate for our future, our community, and our world. Use our voice, our vote, our choices. Speak truth through power like our world depends on it. And importantly, we want to show how to do this peacefully. How can we be peaceful advocates? In the tradition of Gandhi, we have a cultural model of satyagraha, insisting on the truth. We lead by example and advocacy. We support others, we do things ourselves, we help others to do actions that support living beings around the world. And we advocate with these 4 qualities that are also elevated in our sister traditions of Buddhism and Hinduism. These are qualities of Maitri, loving kindness, Karuna, compassion, Pramoda, sympathetic joy, and Madhyastha, equanimity. You can imagine that things don't always go our way. We need to be equanimous and patient, but we can be driven by compassion. We can approach others with a feeling of friendliness, and we can be joyful when we see others that are enacting virtue in ways that help us too. This is a lifelong practice, maybe many lives, but it's something to keep in mind as we advocate, so that we don't just invoke anger energy in trying to change the things that are themselves fueled by anger and greed. The closing of Pratikramaṇa, and I know we're coming on time here, is traditionally marked by forgiveness and blessing. Many of us know the first part of the Kamani prayer, and some of us have heard the Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinar prayer in things like yoga classes. So I'll close here. You can read the English. Kame me sabve jiva kamantu me. Mitti me sabve bhuesu, veram majja na kanaye. Sabve jiva kama vasa chodaha raja bhamanta. Te me savva kama viya majja vi deha kamantu. Sarve bhavantu sukhinah. Sarve shantu niramaya. Sarve bhadrani pashyantu. Ma kaschid dukhabhag bhavet. May everyone revere the sanctity of life. And with that, I'm going to close the formal presentation and say to everybody, for any of the shortcomings that you may have seen in my understanding and presentation, I ask for your understanding and forgiveness. Michami dukram. And we can go to Q&A.
Jina, thank you so very much for a very full, educational, inspiring, and spacious presentation. I think one of the aspects of what you shared today, although there was so much you shared about the science behind climate, the practices in Jain traditions that can meet these challenges for the individual and also for the community. But one of the aspects of what you've shared with us and your generosity of time and teaching is the spaciousness and the approach to meeting the challenges that we all face here together. And that was an example of really how contemplative practices, how religions, how philosophies, how these more open spaces can contribute to actually leading by the example of nonviolence and non-harm and truthfulness in how we meet these conversations. So thank you very much for that. So I do see some comments coming in. I've got some of my own questions, but I'll start by some appreciation that's coming in through our Q&A. And I'll just remind everyone, the Q&A is open. It is anonymous. So as we have been recording Jina's presentation, and we might still include the Q&A in our recording. The questions will be anonymous, and also you're welcome to share your reflections. And you're also welcome to share some of the responses to the questions that Jina presented to us to reflect upon, and maybe how you are practicing some of these suggestions in your lives. So we've got an appreciation here. Thank you, Jina. Great job in blending our knowledge and practice from our Jain scriptures with modern practices. And then here's a question as well. It continues to be hard for Jain centers, executive committee, collectively to do even the most of basic practices when there is a get together. Do you have any ideas? I mean, I know you shared some already, but maybe some that might be a little bit more spontaneous in responding to this question.
One idea that I have is to take advantage of the energy of youth. What we hear continuously from the leaders of Jain centers at various levels, local and national, is that they worry about the future of Jainism in North America. And I think even in India and other places, there's a certain generation that's been leaders and they would like to pass on the tradition. And there's youth that might want community and might want a place to connect. And many of them care a lot about the climate. This is their future, like more than even those of us that are middle-aged and seniors. And so listen to the youth and their concerns and give them a way to help influence how things are done at the temples. That will probably lead to changes in a way that people that are more set in their ways might not want to accept.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. I can kind of see how these traditions are getting passed on and how these conversations are happening more and more with the Jain youth and how important that is. Now we're seeing that within the Arihanta community as well.
Yeah.
So thank you for that question. Let me take a glance here, see if also some more appreciation with wonderful and deep reflections for you. So this is a pretty specific question. Do you have a suggested mode of meditation or mantra to preserve optimism?
Oh, wow. I love that question. And I'm not a meditation teacher per se, but a student in Jain tradition and also some Buddhist traditions. And there's a few things that I think could be worth exploring. So if there's a word for you that resonates, whether it's hope or an Indian word, I don't know where the cultural background of the participant who asked this question is from, whatever language, whatever tradition resonates for you, is there a word that works for you? So you could consider having that word written around you, like on places you're likely to see it in your day. You can consider pausing times in your day and trying to remember that word and the feeling that invokes. You can consider if there's a person, an animal, place that invokes that sense of hope. That could be a meditation. If there's a story that you've read that's like really hopeful, you could consider whether you want to try to remember a nugget of that story and associating hope with something you can call up so that you're cultivating that in your mind is good. And it's also like, how are you a visual? Are you a verbal? Are you a auditory, like oriented person? Are you a tactile person? So use the sense that is most resonant for you and associate something with it and repeat. I think for me, that repeating is something we often don't do in our daily life because we want to like move to the next thing. Repeat the good, repeat the thing that brings you joy and hope.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Gina. So I want to lead into another question here that we see, but I want to share a little bit of something that I just came back from an intensive in the grad program that we do in partnership with Claremont School of Theology, and one of the really interesting aspects of what we've all been learning about the Jains and kind of the emergence of these different religions around the same time from India is that the practice of the mendicants of only being able to travel on foot really limited the ability for the practices that we see in Jainism of asteya, of ahimsa, of aparigraha, of anikantavad to spread right, beyond the subcontinent. And so it's like the very practices of the mendicants who are abiding by these vows prevented these practices that can be so helpful for us, especially at this time, to actually go, to the global stage, to the global, meditation cushion or temple. And so this question is kind of tied into that. Jainism has so much to offer towards helping the climate crisis, but has a history of proselytizing. Actually, never get that word right. But as a non-Jain, how are Jains addressing this issue?
Oh, well, let me address the
Yeah,
first part of what you said and
yeah,
then trying to address the question.
great. Of course.
So
Thank you.
that is the conventional explanation that Jains restrict your travel for our mendicants or ascetics, those monks and nuns, and that limited the spread. There are hypotheses that there may have been other conflict and political reasons that Jains stayed insulated or insular. So in modern times, we see there's different categories of these ascetics, some of whom can travel. So I don't know that that fully explains why things stayed as they did. But in terms of James engaging with the wider world, I think as Jains have migrated, we have started to talk more, like we have joined interfaith forums, like this Jain Declaration on the Climate Crisis is adding to, and kind of a later voice, adding to other religious voices that have made their statements. So that's one example. There's various interfaith platforms where Jains have started going. There might be places that those in India are more familiar with on an interfaith level, but I think the question is more about going outside of India. The Jaina organization in North America, I think, is quite actively trying to address this. So I think there is an element of just showing up to these interfaith forums. There's also, I think, a Jain sensibility of like practice well, be an inspiration, and you cannot help but influence those around you. So maybe on an individual level, that's part of it. On an organizational level, it will take generations to try to further this engagement of Jainism with the wider world. But we're getting there. We're starting.
Great. And I feel like our time together today is actually a great contribution to those conversations as well. And also it kind of ties into what you had said about really reflecting on the purpose of travel. Like if there is going to be travel, there's going to be air travel. Like, what is the purpose behind it? What kind of benefit will that be for all? So I'm going to synthesize a couple of things. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing. And these days, there's so much that can be done virtually. It's astounding how much we can connect, on a platform like Zoom with an organization like Arihanta.
Absolutely. Okay, so I did mention in my previous comments Anekantavad. So we have, of course, some more appreciation for you, just very well presented. Please explain Anekant to resolve the differences among us. I guess the question would be, how can Jains and even non-Jains practice Anekantavad in communities and conversations that might be, might have the potential for harm when there's differences, maybe cultural differences about dairy, differences in thought around the choices that we make surrounding climate and justice.
So I think there's some subtlety around what we mean by Anekantavad, not taking away from the need to be understanding of different choices that people make. So my understanding of Anekantvad is that we need to appreciate that any one of us have an incomplete understanding of reality. We're all trying to understand what cannot even necessarily be put in words, let alone any one of us can actually understand in our mind. So like the metaphor that I think is in other religions too is the blind man and the elephant. One blind man will feel something and the tail and say it's a rope, and somebody else will feel another leg and think it's a tree trunk, and no one has the full picture. I've heard it said that Anekantvad does not apply to morals per se, that it's not that eating meat is equally okay to not eating meat. Like there is something called doing least harm, and the consequences of doing harm, in addition to what we can see towards that other being, come to ourselves, whether we believe it or not. However, people may be ready to take certain choices to a greater or lesser extent, to make certain choices different from each other. So it's not consistent with ahimsa to have a negative way of interacting with someone who has a different choice. But it's also, Anekantvad is not an excuse to say, well, everybody has their way of doing it, it's all okay. It's not all okay. But, as we've, Deanna and I have been in a session with another really great teacher, we can say something about the action, that person has chosen an action that might be less wholesome, without saying that person is a bad person, or, treating that person as if they're not worthy of our love and attention. So I think it's about respecting individuals, understanding they will have different choices, not saying it's all okay because it's all Anekantvad, but figuring out what the common ground is and working from there. That's my understanding. Again, not claiming to be an expert or a teacher of religion, just as a student.
A wonderful response to the question. And don't have any more direct questions. I've got a few of my own, but we definitely have some more appreciation. So I'll share these in case other people have questions that they wanted to write at this time. Thank you for the thoughtful event. Nice reminder of the true essence of Jainism. As you've shown here, there are many ways we can incorporate these values. And some reflections on gratitude practice during meditation can also help with preserving optimism, perhaps remembering, examples of merit within our own lives and within our communities.
Great reminder.
Yeah.
That's true. Celebrating when you do things and you see things that are beneficial, virtuous. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great idea.
Something I think we've spoken about,
Yeah.
within Tashi's meditation circles, of actually remembering that.
Yeah.
And it's hard to do, with all of the information, even when it's presented in such a beautiful way that you presented it, to be able to see without judgment, but with very clear eyes, the situation that we're all walking together. And
Yeah.
to actually take the time to turn towards those meritorious acts really can be difficult, but it can really actually be quite beneficial to keep ourselves on the path.
And these
Go
acts
ahead.
can be near and far. These acts can be near and far. They could be as close as your family member doing something wonderful. They can be, like news subscriptions for good news, so that we're not constantly barraged by the bad stuff. So that is important. Yeah. And not shying away from saying, hey, I did something good. I made a good choice. That's also good.
Yeah. I think taking the time for that is really important. That leads me, we've got a few other comments, and I'll give again more space for people to have questions, but that does kind of lead me to one of the questions that I wrote down around, because of your medical background, what do you think are some of like these physiological and psychological effects that people have to seeing the way the news is presented about climate these days, and the impact to us psychologically and even physiologically, and how can we kind of overcome that? And I'm sure you've already answered this in many ways in your presentation, but how can we work with that, overcome that, and even conversations that we have when climate is brought up in communities or family dinners? How can we overcome that and kind of shift that psychological or physiological response that we have, that aversion response that we have to how all of the climate news is being presented, to actually turn towards the practices and towards being an example and living by example?
I feel like the person who's asked the question
Oh, that's
has,
me, actually.
oh, I was going to say, you
Yeah,
have
yeah.
the answers, because it's amazing. What an amazing question. So I would say, mind body continuum, that is an important aspect to consider. Like you've kind of talked about the physiology and psychology together. And that is important, because we know there's a stress response, and we know that that affects many different systems in the body, can increase our risk for many types of diseases, and can make us feel diseased, right? And when we are activated by distressing news or images, or what we see around us, what we feel in our own environments, it can be overwhelming. And so for some people, they have past trauma, and that like reactivation of overwhelming grief is going to make them shut down. And for some people, they're just anticipating that they're going to have a really difficult response, and they don't want to go there. I was actually in a hike with a vegan group over the last couple of days, and somebody said he was thinking about cutting down meat, and he understood the environmental consequences, but then he just decided to eat it again, and he decided not to think about it anymore. So he just blocks it out. So this is also a response that people have. The varieties of ways that people can handle, like I think I mentioned earlier, the cognitive dissonance, the grief that can arise. And it also can be the other way, people that really are doing their best to make the right choices, but they feel it's beyond any individual, because this is, like we said, global institutions and collective action that, like, we might choose to have, as little driving as possible, have an electric car, have solar panels, have a small house, be vegan, and yet we're going to be in a place that's going to have smoke effect, that comes in from the fires. And no matter what we do, we cannot convince our family members to give up dairy. We can't convince our temple to do what we want. So there can be this feeling of just like nothing's changing. It doesn't matter what I do. And I struggle with that, to be honest. I do struggle with that too. So what do we do with that? I think coming back to the individual practice, finding community, trying to do our part to put good out there and attract the kind of community that we need to help us all stay sane is helpful. So those are the things that I have to offer. But I mean, I don't have like the solution to it, because this is also why I'm conducting this kind of Pratikramaṇa, because I like that we have a community that's actually interested in this. And if people are interested in having a continuing conversation, we can discuss if there's a way to do that. Because I think it is important to support each other.
I think this is a great conversation to continue within the community, of course. And thank you for your response to those reflections. It's something I think about quite often is, how do we stay? And that is, I think, part of the discomfort. The discomfort is so nuanced. It's not necessarily the discomfort of being the one, vegan at a particular event, or the discomfort or of intentionally changing how we eat or how we're living, and kind of the more tangible discomforts in that way, but also like the discomfort of seeing some of the information that you've presented, and the discomfort of having to discern how we actually take in and how much of that information we're able to take in at any given time, so that we don't push our systems to a particular point to be uncomfortable, but also recognize that when they get pushed to a certain level, that there is more of a possibility that we will be angry, that we will actually act out and contribute more violence to the very world that we're wanting to see less violence in. And so I think there's a great amount of discernment that needs to happen for each of us as individuals and also collectively. But I think, that question of how do we stay? How do we stay with the difficulties and all of the practices and in the religious and the different traditions really do give us the support and the ground for that. We do have another, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'll say one other thing. So I think she's not here right now, but one of the other friends that was here was in a singing group that performed for people at the threshold of living and dying. So things like music, things like art, it's beyond words sometimes. I mean, people can really heal and communicate wonderful things from the other part of ourselves, not our left brain that takes in information and has to see everything linear. I will say that. The other thing I'll say is that, when we've heard that from our other meditation teacher, that taking action, even little steps, is sometimes the best way to respond when we see something distressing. Like, at least I can do this. So it really depends on where we are.
Thank you. We do have a comment that might prompt a little more reflection from you, Jina. Gurudev, let's see if I get this right, Chitrabhanuji and Acharya Sushil Muni traveled to USA and established Jain temple and Siddhachalam that helps to spread Jainism. So if you wanted to share a little bit more about that for everybody, they might know already.
I think that Intendi might have said, look, these are examples of spiritual teachers that didn't restrict themselves to traveling by foot, as in some of the Indian ascetic rules might have conservatively prohibited them to do. So they're saying, look, these two teachers did come and they did help spread Jainism. And due to their efforts supporting the Jain Association of the Federation of Jain Associations in North America, there's a support structure for Jain Center. So yeah, there are some leaders that have done it, and there continue to be others like Rakesh Javeri and others that travel. And now that there's more Jains in the U.S., there's invitations coming for other scholars. And so, yes, I mean, they're not. So this is what I was saying earlier. There's categories of teachers that aren't following those very strict rules, and they are facilitating the interplay of ideas. But I don't think it has to be originating from India. I think we need to know our principles, but I think we can have homegrown teachers too. And we need to be open to that. I think sometimes people get a little entrenched in the idea that the original true Jainism is in India and that like we can't deviate from that. And I think we have to innovate in some ways.
It seems like a form of adaptation to the circumstances that we are, and in a way to actually keep the teachings very alive and very present. And I think that passing on to the Jain youth and the recognizing that we are in a particular period of time. One of my professors says a very, 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 very bad time where liberation is very difficult, if not impossible. And that ought to give us a sense of solidarity and trust in the teachings, in how they are alive now and how they can continue to support these conversations, and also leading by example and seeing things a little bit anew, but still grounded in the origins. So we've got just another minute or so. So if you have any closing words, Jina. You've shared so much with our community. We're very glad to be able to have recorded this, to edit and pass on to everybody, and to hopefully continue the conversation moving forward. I think this is just very relevant, very important, and does provide a space for people to feel like there is somewhere to go to express their questions, and to listen to everything that you have to share with us.
You know what? I'm just gonna really thank everybody for their attendance, and I want to share a way to contact, well, some information that you can go to, and then how to connect with us. So probably the easiest thing is, and can I put something in the Q&A myself? Can I add it in here myself? I think I can. So
yeah.
I'm going to say I can be emailed at veganjains@gmail.com if you wanted to send me any follow-up. And then I think we are planning to post the recording. And, we talked a little bit about if people want to have continuing conversation. If you email, if there's folks that want to continue to talk about Jainism, specifically how we can work on the climate, we can do that. For those of you that aren't Jain that are here, but have another faith that you identify with, there's an organization called Green Faith. And you might see, where your tradition fits into this conversation and how people, leaders who are engaging from your tradition with the climate want to act. So besides that, if you want to talk about anything else, just email and we can continue. And then otherwise, I think maybe I'll say again, Michami Dupram to everybody.
Thank you, Jina. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We're very grateful to have Jina here presenting and opening up this conversation with all of us. And we hope that it continues for everyone here. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Jai Jinendra, and see you all again.
Jai Jinendra. Bye, everybody.